billionaire's son hadn't walked since the accident, until the poor mother's daughter made the impossible happen. Silence had moved into that house along with the tragedy. Henry crossed the rooms every morning with measured steps, almost apologizing for making noise. The house was too big for two people who felt so small inside. Every room remained impeccable, organized, cold, as if life had been tidied up, never to be messy again. He would stop at Nolan's bedroom door every morning, take a deep breath, and enter with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Good morning, champ." The boy never answered. He just looked at the window where the light came in but didn't illuminate anything. Nolan was 5 years old, but he seemed to carry the exhaustion of decades. His blue eyes, which once shined with every new discovery, now looked like frosted glass. He didn't cry. He didn't complain. He just existed, sitting in the wheelchair that Henry pushed from one side to the other, as if carrying his son could alleviate the weight of his own guilt. Henry knew the accident wasn't his fault. Everyone said so. The doctors, his friends, even the therapist repeated it like a mantra. But he also knew a truth that no one else did. He had argued with his wife that morning. A silly fight about work, about him never being home. She left angry, taking Nolan to get ice cream, and she didn't come back. The car was hit on the right side. She died instantly. Nolan survived too, but his legs stopped responding. The doctors explained about spinal injuries, about remote chances of recovery, about physical therapy and patience. Henry heard it all and understood only one thing. He had destroyed his own son's life. So he did what he knew how to do. He worked. He worked until he felt nothing, until the meetings blurred into days, until the office became a more comfortable refuge than his own home. He hired nurses, physical therapists, tutors. He bought the best equipment, the most expensive toys, and turned Nolan's room into a small, chill private amusement park. But the boy didn't play. He just observed everything with that empty gaze, as if he were trapped inside himself and no longer knew the way out. Last Thursday, Nolan's therapist asked to speak with Henry privately. She was a middle-aged woman, grey hair in a bun, her gaze firm but kind. The kind of person who didn't waste words. "Mr. Caldwell, may I be blunt? Please. What your son needs isn't in this house." Henry frowned. "He has everything here, state-of-the-art equipment, qualified professionals, comfort. He has everything, except life." She leaned forward. "Nolan is pulling away from the world, not because of his legs, but because he's lost the will to be part of it. And you are pulling away too. I do what I can." "I know, but he doesn't need what you can buy. He needs what you can give." Henry looked away. Guilt tightened his chest like a vice. "And what am I supposed to give? I can't even look at him without remembering. Take him to the park." Her voice was soft but carried urgency. "Put him in the sun. Let him see other children. The sun can heal what words cannot reach." Henry was silent for a long moment. What if he doesn't want to go? Then go anyway. Sometimes we need to be carried to life before we choose to live it. Those words echoed in Henry's head for the next few days. He hesitated. He thought of 1,000 excuses to postpone, to not go. The park was too far. Nolan might get tired. What if it rained? What if other children asked questions? What if... But on Sunday morning, something changed. Henry woke up early, had coffee alone in the silent kitchen, and went up to Nolan's room. The boy was still sleeping, his face peaceful against the pillow. He looked so small, so fragile. Henry felt his throat tighten. "We're going out today," he whispered, more to himself than to his son. While waiting for Nolan to wake up, Henry walked around the room. He looked at the shelves full of untouched toys, the new books with their pages still stiff, the expensive tablet forgotten on the table. It all looked like a memorial to a childhood that would never happen. That's when he saw it, half hidden under the bed, a little blue car. Henry bent down and picked it up carefully. The paint was faded. One wheel was missing. The hood had a dent. It was Nolan's favorite toy before the accident. The boy used to take that car everywhere, making engine noises, inventing imaginary races through the house. Henry remembered a specific day. Nolan was 4 and lying on the living room floor, pushing the car over the rug, making impossible turns. His wife was sitting on the sofa, smiling, and Henry had just gotten home from work. "Daddy, look! The blue car won again. He always wins, doesn't he, champ? Always, because he's the fastest in the world." Henry squeezed the car in his fingers. A wave of pain rose in his chest, but this time, something else came with it. Something like hope. He put the car in his coat pocket. When Nolan woke up, Henry was ready. He dressed his son calmly, placed him in the wheelchair, and pushed him toward the door. Nolan didn't ask where they were going. He showed no curiosity or resistance. He just let himself be taken, as always. But when Henry opened the front door and the morning light flooded the entryway, something different happened. Nolan blinked. It wasn't much, just an involuntary reflex against the unexpected brightness. But for Henry, it was like seeing his son wake up after months of sleep. They went down the entrance ramp and along the sidewalk. The neighborhood was quiet, tree-lined, the kind of place where happy families lived. Henry felt the weight of the blue car in his pocket with every step. He didn't know what he expected to find at the park. He wasn't sure if it would make any difference. But for the first time in a long time he was trying, not out of obligation, not out of guilt. He was trying because, perhaps, there was still something left to save. Not just in Nolan, in himself too. The silent house was left behind, and the world outside was waiting, full of noise, of movement, of life. And somewhere, Henry knew, there was a spark waiting to be reignited. He just needed to find it. The park was full. Henry pushed Nolan's wheelchair to a bench under the shade of an oak tree and stopped there, not knowing exactly what to do. Kids were running everywhere, shouting, laughing, chasing balls and imaginary birds. Parents chatted in groups, mothers pushed swings, grandmothers handed out cookies. The place was breathing life, and Nolan just watched. Henry sat on the bench next to his son, his hands clasped tense. He wanted to say something, anything to break the heavy silence between them, but the words wouldn't come. They never came. Nolan looked at the children with an expression Henry couldn't decipher. It wasn't sadness, exactly. Maybe it was something worse, indifference. As if he were watching a movie of a life that was no longer his. A boy ran past them, chasing a red kite that danced in the wind. Another group was playing soccer on a makeshift field. A little girl climbed the slide, hesitant, while her mother encouraged her from below. Henry watched it all and felt his chest tighten. He had brought his son here, but now he didn't know what to do. He didn't know how to build a bridge between that noisy world and the silence that enveloped Nolan. Maybe the therapist was wrong. Maybe it was too soon. "Hi!" The voice came like a ray of sunshine breaking through the clouds. Henry and Nolan turned at the same time. A girl was standing in front of them. She must have been 6 or 7 years old, with messy blonde hair falling over her shoulders, and bright, clear eyes shining with fearless curiosity. She wore a simple dress, a little too big for her, and scuffed sneakers, but her smile was enormous, sincere, the kind that lights up everything around it. "Hi," she repeated, waving at Nolan. Nolan didn't answer. He just looked at her, surprised, as if he didn't expect anyone to talk to him. The girl tilted her head, curious. "Do you want to play with me?" The silence that followed was painful. Henry felt the urge to answer for Nolan, to explain, to send the girl away before she asked too many questions. But something made him stay quiet. Nolan looked down, his hands closing over the wheels of his chair. His cheeks flushed slightly. He didn't say anything, but Henry knew that expression. Shame. The girl noticed the hesitation, but didn't seem bothered. She looked around, as if assessing the situation, and then simply sat on the ground next to Nolan's wheelchair. "That's okay," she said, pulling a handful of small toys from her dress pocket. "I can play right here. We'll be grass neighbors." Henry blinked, surprised. The girl had just created such a simple, natural solution that he almost smiled. She began to arrange her toys on the grass, a few plastic animals, a doll missing an arm, colorful rocks she had apparently collected. She talked to herself as she played, narrating stories in an animated voice. This one is the rabbit, he's the fastest. But this is the lion, so nobody messes with him. And this is the princess, except she doesn't like dresses very much, so she wears pants. Nolan watched, motionless. But Henry noticed something different. His son had lifted his head. He wasn't staring at the ground anymore. He was looking at her. The girl held up one of the plastic animals, a blue horse, and made it gallop through the air until it stopped right in front of Nolan. This one doesn't have a name yet. Do you want to name him? Nolan didn't answer, but his eyes followed the toy's movement. Henry held his breath. The girl didn't seem disappointed by the silence. She simply continued. Okay, I'll call him Lightning. How about that? She made the horse do a complete circle. Lightning is very fast, but he likes making friends. She placed the horse on the grass next to Nolan, as if offering a silent gift. Nolan looked at the toy, then at the girl. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but closed it again. The girl smiled. I'm Ivy. What's your name? Silence. Henry was about to intervene when Nolan finally whispered, Nolan. The voice was so quiet, Henry almost didn't hear it, but Ivy heard it perfectly. Nolan, what a cool name. She clapped her hands. Do you live near here? Nolan shrugged, awkwardly. I live over there. Ivy pointed vaguely in some direction. My mum is over there talking to that lady. She always talks a lot. That's why I usually play by myself. She continued setting up a scene with her toys, creating dialogue between the characters. Nolan didn't take his eyes off her. There was something in the way Ivy moved, so free, so natural, that it seemed impossible not to pay attention. You know what's funny? Ivy said suddenly, turning to Nolan. I never make friends at the park because the kids always want to run. But I like inventing stories more. Do you like stories? Nolan hesitated, but then he made a small movement with his head. An almost imperceptible nod. Ivy's smile grew even wider. I knew it. You look like someone who likes stories. She began to tell a story about a princess who found a dragon in the garden, but instead of running away, they became best friends. The narrative was chaotic, full of nonsensical twists, but there was a pure energy to it that held his attention. Ivy did different voices for each character, using the toys as actors on an imaginary stage. The dragon was grumpy but kind. The princess was brave but clumsy, and together they had adventures that made no sense but were perfect just the way they were. And then it happened. When Ivy made the toy dragon take a giant leap and land flat on its belly, making a ridiculous sound with her mouth, Nolan made a sound, a short, quiet, but unmistakable sound, a laugh. Henry felt his heart stop. Nolan was smiling, not much, just a slight curve at the corners of his mouth, almost shy, but it was there, real, true. Henry's hands gripped his knees. He had to bite his lip to keep from making a sound, from breaking that fragile moment. The girl kept playing without making a fuss, as if she hadn't noticed the miracle that had just occurred. But Henry noticed, and he couldn't look away. The son he believed he had lost was still there, hidden, hurt, scared, but still there. Ivy lifted her clear eyes to Nolan and asked with perfect calm, "Do you want to hold Lightning?" Nolan looked at his own hands, then at the blue horse. Slowly, very slowly, he held out his hand. Ivy placed the toy in his palm carefully. There. Now he's yours too. Nolan held the horse and studied it, as if it were the most precious thing in the world. His fingers traced the toy's outline, and Henry saw something he hadn't seen in months. Interest, curiosity, life. Ivy went back to playing, now including the horse Nolan was holding in her stories. She spoke for him, made up lines, created adventures. Lightning is the bravest of all, Ivy said. He's not afraid of anything. Not thunder, not the dark, not being alone. Nolan held the toy a little tighter. Henry remained on the bench, his hands clasped, his eyes moist. He didn't know who this girl with bright eyes and an easy smile was, but in that moment, she had done what doctors, therapists, and all the money in the world could not. She had brought Nolan back, even if just for a few minutes. Ivy looked at Nolan and smiled. "Can we play again next weekend?" Nolan didn't answer right away, but then, for the first time since the accident, he looked directly into someone else's eyes and gave a small nod. Yes. And for the first time in months, Henry felt something besides guilt and despair. He felt hope. Henry was still processing what he had just witnessed when a soft voice sounded behind him. "Ivy, honey, it's time to go." He turned and saw a woman approaching. She was young, probably in her early 30s, with blonde hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, and the same clear eyes as Ivy. She wore faded jeans and a white blouse that had seen better days. There was something about her that caught his attention. It wasn't conventional beauty, but a kind of quiet dignity that showed through, even in the worn clothes. Ivy jumped up. "Mommy, this is Nolan. We played together." The woman looked at Nolan with a gentle smile, then at Henry. There was caution in her eyes, but also kindness. "Hello. I hope Ivy wasn't bothering you." "No, not at all," Henry replied too quickly, standing up from the bench. She was wonderful." The woman seemed surprised by the intensity in his voice. "My name is Elena." "Henry." He held out his hand, and she shook it firmly. "And this is my son, Nolan." Elena looked at the boy carefully, but there was no pity in her eyes, just genuine interest. "It's nice to meet you, Nolan." Nolan didn't respond, but he also didn't look away as he usually did. Ivy bounced beside him. "We're going to play again next weekend, right, Nolan?" He gave a small nod, and Henry felt his chest tighten again. This was progress. Real and palpable. Elena noticed the silent exchange between the children and smiled. "It looks like you two got along well." "Ivy is very special," Henry said, and it was true. She managed to do something that... He stopped, not knowing how to continue without sounding melodramatic. Elena looked at him with understanding, as if she understood what he couldn't say. "Ivy has that gift," she said softly. "She sees people, not their situations." Henry nodded, swallowing hard. There was a moment of comfortable silence between them. Ivy had gone back to playing with her toys at Nolan's feet, setting up one last scene before leaving. "Do you live nearby?" Henry asked, trying to prolong the conversation. "A few blocks that way." Elena pointed in the opposite direction of Henry's house. "We usually come to the park on Sundays. It's Ivy's favorite thing when I see." Another silence. Henry searched for something to say, some way to maintain this connection that, somehow, felt important. "Ivy, honey, we need to go," Elena called gently. The girl gathered her toys but left the blue horse in Nolan's hand. "You can keep him until we see each other again." Nolan clutched the toy to his chest, and for the first time in months, Henry saw something like gratitude in his son's eyes. Eleanor took Ivy's hand and waved at Henry. "It was a pleasure to meet you both." "You too." They started to walk away, but something made Henry stand up. "Elena, wait." She stopped and turned. Henry didn't know exactly what he was going to say, but the words came out before he could overthink it. "Can I offer you something? A coffee, perhaps?" "As a thank you for today's kindness." Elena hesitated. Ivy pulled on her hand, excited. "Come on, Mom, I want ice cream." Elena looked at her daughter, then at Henry. There was something in her face, a quick vulnerability she tried to hide, but that Henry caught. "All right," she said finally, "but let me treat you. There's an ice cream shop nearby." Henry was about to protest, but something in her posture made him accept. Of course. They walked to a small ice cream shop at the park's exit. The place was simple, a few plastic tables under a striped awning. Ivy chose chocolate. Nolan accepted vanilla with a silent nod, and Henry ordered coffee. When Elena went to pay, Henry noticed her carefully counting coins before handing them to the cashier. They sat at an outdoor table. Ivy talked non-stop, telling Nolan stories about her toys, the park, about everything and nothing. Nolan didn't respond, but he listened, and that was more than Henry had seen in months. Elena watched her daughter with a soft smile, but Henry noticed the tension around her eyes, the exhaustion she tried to hide. "Ivy seems very happy," he said. "She's my light," Elena answered simply. "Even when things get hard, she reminds me there's always a reason to smile." Henry heard the weight in those words. "Have things been hard?" Elena looked at him, assessing whether she should be honest. Then she shrugged. "I've been unemployed for a few months. We get by selling sweets I make at home. It's not much, but it covers the basics." Henry felt a pang in his chest. He had so much, and this woman, who had raised such a special daughter, was struggling to survive. "What did you do?" "Administration, at a big company." She stirred the coffee she had ordered for herself. "I was fired when Ivy got sick and I had to miss a few days. They said they couldn't keep someone who wasn't reliable." The injustice of it hit Henry like a punch. He knew that kind of decision. He had approved similar dismissals himself in the past, prioritizing numbers over people. "I'm sorry. Don't be..." Elena smiled, but there was sadness in it. "We manage. And Ivy doesn't know any different." To her, every day is an adventure. Henry looked at the two children, at the way Ivy included Nolan in her world so effortlessly, without judgment. And then, without thinking, he said, "Work at my house." Elena blinked, surprised. "What?" "I need someone to help with organizing. Maybe prepare some meals." The words were coming quickly now. "You can bring Ivy. She's good for Nolan." Eleanor was silent for a long moment, processing the offer. "Mr. Caldwell." "Henry, please, Henry." She took a deep breath. "I don't want charity." "It's not charity." He leaned forward. "I saw what your daughter did for my son in 1 hour. She made him smile. She made him connect. Doctors and therapists have been trying for months and couldn't. If she's around more often, maybe Nolan will come back." Eleanor looked at her daughter, who was making Nolan hold the ice cream spoon, encouraging him to eat on his own. "I don't know if it's a good idea to mix 3 times a week," Henry interrupted. "A fair wage. You choose the days and hours that work for you." Elena bit her lip, clearly torn. "Why are you doing this?" Henry looked at Nolan, at the son he had lost and who, today, had shown the first sign that he was still there. "Because today I saw hope for the first time in a long time, and I think you and we both know what it's like to fight alone. Maybe we don't have to." Elena fell silent, her eyes watery. She looked at Ivy, then at Nolan, then back at Henry. "This isn't out of pity?" she asked quietly. "It's not pity," he assured her. "It's necessity. Mine and Nolan's." Elena discreetly wiped her eyes and nodded slowly. "Okay, we'll try." Henry felt something release in his chest. "Thank you. No, thank you." They finished their ice cream in a lighter silence. Ivy kept talking, building bridges between two worlds that had seemed impossible to connect. When they said goodbye, Elena shook Henry's hand firmly. "Monday. In the morning. Perfect." Ivy gave Nolan a quick hug, catching the boy by surprise. "See you later, grass neighbor." Henry pushed Nolan's wheelchair back home, the little blue horse still in his son's hand. Behind them, Elena and Ivy walked in the opposite direction, 2 silhouettes against the late afternoon light, 2 broken families, each in their own way, but maybe, just maybe, starting to touch without realizing it. And in the stillness of that walk, Henry felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time: possibility. The first Monday arrived with a nervousness Henry hadn't expected to feel. He woke up earlier, checked that the house was tidy, made coffee, and paced the kitchen, not knowing what to do with his hands. Nolan was still asleep, but Henry went up every 10 minutes to see if his son was awake. When the doorbell rang at 9 a.m., he nearly ran to the door. Elena was there, with Ivy beside her. The girl was carrying a small backpack and smiling from ear to ear. "Good morning," Elena said, a little shy. "Good morning, please come in." Ivy didn't need a second invitation. She walked in as if she owned the place, looking around with genuine curiosity. "Wow, your house is huge," Henry smiled sheepishly. "It's too big for just the two of us, really." Elena entered more cautiously, observing everything with attentive eyes. The house was immaculate but cold. It looked more like a showroom than a home. "Where's Nolan?" Ivy asked, looking down the hall. "Still sleeping, but he should be up any minute. Can I go wake him up?" Henry hesitated, but Elena was already saying, "Ivy, let the boy sleep." "It's okay," Henry interrupted. "His room is at the end of the hall on the left, but knock first." Ivy ran off before anyone could change their mind. Elena looked at Henry, worried. "Sorry, she's very perfect," Henry completed. "She's perfect." Elena smiled, relaxing a bit. Henry showed her the kitchen, the pantry, explained where the cleaning supplies and towels were. Elena listened attentively, asking practical and sensible questions. "It doesn't have to be anything complicated," Henry said. "Just keep things organized, maybe prepare lunch. Whatever you think is best." "Understood." From upstairs came a cry of joy. "Nolan, you're awake." Henry and Elena exchanged a look and went up together. In the bedroom, Ivy was sitting on the edge of Nolan's bed, holding the blue horse she had lent him at the park. "You took good care of Lightning. Look how shiny he is." Nolan was sitting up, his hair messy, his eyes still sleepy. But he was looking at Ivy with something Henry hadn't seen in a long time. Expectation. "Good morning, champ," Henry said from the doorway. Nolan looked at his father and, to Henry's surprise, he smiled. A small but present smile. Ivy came to play. Henry felt his throat tighten. Those were the first words Nolan had said in the morning in weeks. "She'll be here 3 times a week," Henry explained. "Her mum, Elena, is going to work here, so you'll see each other a lot." Nolan looked at Ivy, who clapped her hands. "We're going to be almost like brother and sister." Eleanor laughed quietly behind Henry, and he realized she was emotional too. After breakfast, which for the first time in months had conversation and laughter, Eleanor started to work. But it quickly became clear this was not a typical work relationship. Ivy didn't leave Nolan alone for a second. She pushed his wheelchair through the hallways, showed him every room in the house as if it were an expedition, and invented games that worked even with Nolan sitting down. "This is the ballroom," she declared in the living room. "And that's the castle tower." She pointed to the staircase. Nolan laughed, a quiet, almost rusty sound, but it was like music to Henry. Elena cleaned the kitchen and watched the two of them through the doorway, a soft smile on her face. Henry, who was supposed to be working in his office, found excuses to come out and see what the children were doing. On Wednesday of the first week, Henry heard a noise from the living room and went to check. Ivy had spread cushions all over the floor and built a sort of fort. Nolan was in the middle, surrounded by pillows, laughing as Ivy pretended to be a dragon attacking the castle. "You have to defend me," Ivy shouted dramatically. "Use your magic sword." Nolan picked up a broomstick Ivy had given him and waved it in the air. "I beat you," he said, his voice louder than Henry had heard it in months. Ivy fell to the floor, acting out an exaggerated death scene. "You're too strong, Sir Nolan." Henry stood in the doorway, watching. His chest was tight, but this time it wasn't from pain. It was from something he had forgotten how to feel. Joy. Elena appeared beside him, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "They're special together," she said quietly. "They are," Henry agreed, not taking his eyes off the kids. "Thank you for this." He looked at her, surprised. "I should be thanking you." "Then maybe we're even." They smiled at each other, and in that moment, something silent settled between them. A recognition, a connection. The following weeks brought a routine Henry didn't know he needed. On Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, Elena arrived at 9. Ivy would burst through the door looking for Nolan immediately. The two would disappear on imaginary adventures while Elena took care of the house. But it wasn't just that. Elena cooked, and the house began to smell like real food. She opened the windows, let the sun in, and put fresh flowers on the kitchen table. The house was breathing again. Henry started working less, or rather he started working from home more often, just to be nearby. He found himself leaving his office to watch Nolan and Ivy playing in the yard. He heard their laughter echoing through the halls and smiled to himself. One afternoon, he was in his office when he heard Nolan shout, "Daddy, Daddy, come see!" Henry shot up and ran to the living room. Nolan was in his chair, holding a drawing he had made with Ivy. It was a house with 4 people in front, a tall man, a woman with long hair, and 2 children. "We made a family," Ivy explained, proud. "This is you, this is Nolan, this is me, and this is my mom." Henry took the drawing with trembling hands. Nolan looked at him, waiting for approval. "It's beautiful, champ. Can we put it on the fridge?" Henry had to swallow the lump in his throat. "Of course we can." He stuck the drawing on the refrigerator with a magnet and stared at it for a long time. 4 people, a family. Eleanor came into the kitchen and stopped when she saw the drawing. "They have quite the imagination," she said, but her voice was slightly shaky. "They do," Henry agreed. They stood there, side by side, looking at the drawing that represented something neither of them dared to name yet. In the yard, Ivy was chasing butterflies while Nolan watched from his chair, laughing every time she tripped on the grass. The sound of childhood had returned to that house. Laughter, playful screams, running footsteps, slamming doors, all the chaotic, wonderful noise Henry had forgotten a house could have. At night, after Eleanor and Ivy had left, Henry went up to put Nolan to bed. And for the first time in months, his son asked for stories, talked about his day, asked when Ivy would be back. "She's my best friend," Nolan said one night, hugging the blue horse. "I know, champ. And Elena is nice too. Yes, she is. Daddy, yes, I'm happy." Henry kissed his son's forehead, his eyes stinging. "Me too, Nolan. Me too." And it was true. For the first time since the tragedy, Henry felt something besides guilt and regret. He felt life. Joy had returned without asking permission, brought by a girl with clear eyes and an easy smile, and by the mother who raised her to see light where others saw only shadows. The house was no longer silent, it was breathing. And along with it, Henry and Nolan started breathing again too. It was a Friday afternoon, and the fall sun painted the yard in golden hues. Elena was in the kitchen preparing lunch, while Henry worked in his office with the door ajar. But as always happened lately, his attention was more on the sound of the children outside than on the numbers on his computer screen. Ivy had pushed Nolan's chair under the large tree at the back of the yard. They sat there, in silence, just watching the leaves fall slowly. It was a different silence than the one that used to surround Nolan. It wasn't heavy or empty. It was peaceful, the kind that exists between true friends. Ivy swung her legs, sitting on the grass, picking up leaves and making colorful piles. Nolan watched, the blue horse in his hand as always. Then suddenly Ivy stopped what she was doing and looked at Nolan. "Nolan." She hesitated, biting her lip as she did when she was thinking about something serious. "Why are you like this?" The silence that followed was heavy. Nolan looked down, his fingers tightening around the toy. For a moment, Ivy thought she had asked the wrong question, that maybe she should have stayed quiet. But then Nolan spoke, his voice so low it barely came out. "We were in an accident." Ivy stayed quiet, waiting. She didn't interrupt him, didn't try to change the subject. She just waited. "I wanted ice cream," Nolan continued, each word seeming to hurt. "Mommy took me. The car crashed. She died." The last word came out broken, and Nolan's eyes filled with tears he tried to hold back. Ivy looked at her friend, and her face filled with a compassion that seemed too big for a 6-year-old. She moved closer, knelt beside his chair, and touched his arm gently. "Nolan, listen." Her voice was firm, filled with a conviction that didn't match her age. "You can do it." Nolan looked up, surprised. "Do what?" "Walk again." Nolan shook his head, the tears finally streaming. "I can't. The doctor said it's really hard." "But I'll help you," Ivy interrupted, holding his hand with both of her small ones. On the porch, Henry had come out of his office when he heard the voices. He was standing there watching the scene unseen. When he heard Ivy's words, when he saw the pure, innocent determination on that little girl's face, he brought his hand to his mouth. "It's not possible," he whispered, his eyes welling up. But Ivy wasn't finished. She stood up, faced Nolan, and declared with all the certainty in the world, "I'm going to help you walk again." Nolan looked at her, and something in his face changed. The hopelessness that lived there, that silent acceptance of his fate, began to crack. "Do you really think I can?" he asked, his voice thick with a fragile, painful hope. Ivy smiled, and it was the most beautiful, confident smile Henry had ever seen. "I know you can." Nolan began to cry for real now, but it was no longer the empty sadness from before. It was something different, something that looked like hope mixed with fear, with desire, with the possibility of dreaming again. "But I don't know if I can," he sobbed. "I tried and I couldn't. It hurts too much. Then we'll go slow." Ivy wiped his tears with her hand. "A little bit at a time, like when you learn to ride a bike. You fall, you get up, you fall again until you get it. But what if I never get it? Then at least we tried." Ivy shrugged, as if it were the simplest thing in the world, and trying is already brave. Nolan looked at his own legs, lying still. Then he looked at Ivy, at this girl who believed in him more than he believed in himself. "Will you stay with me, even if it's really hard?" "Always." Ivy held out her pinky finger. "Pinky promise." Nolan linked his finger with hers, and they stayed like that for a moment, sealing a pact that was bigger than they could understand. On the porch, Henry couldn't move. Tears streamed freely down his face, and he didn't even try to wipe them. For months he had accepted the doctor's verdict as final. He had resigned himself to the idea that Nolan would probably never walk again. He had built an entire life around that truth. But here was a 6-year-old girl saying it was worth trying. And her faith was so pure, so absolute, that Henry felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. He felt faith, not the blind, desperate faith of someone clinging to impossible miracles, but real faith, sustained by the belief that it's worth trying, that it's worth fighting, that it's worth believing things can be different. Helena appeared on the porch, drying her hands on her apron. "Lunches?" She stopped when she saw Henry's face. "What happened?" Henry pointed to the yard, unable to speak. Elena looked and saw Ivy and Nolan still holding hands, talking quietly. She hadn't heard the conversation, but something in the children's posture made her understand that something important had happened. "Ivy." Henry finally managed to speak, his voice hoarse. "She said she's going to help Nolan try to walk again." Elena was silent for a moment, processing. "And you believe it's possible?" Henry looked at her, and for the first time in a long time there was light in his eyes. "I don't know, but I want to believe." "Then believe." Elena touched his arm gently. "Sometimes faith starts like that, with an "I want to." Henry looked back at the yard. Ivy was now showing Nolan how she bent and stretched her own legs, trying to explain the movement. "Look, it's like this. We think leg move one and it moves." Nolan watched intently, as if memorizing every word. "It doesn't work like that for me." "Not yet. But it can. You just need to practice a lot." Her childlike logic was so simple, so pure, that it almost made sense. Henry came down from the porch and walked over to them. The children looked up, and Ivy smiled. "Hi, Mr. Henry. I'm going to help Nolan." "I heard..." Henry knelt beside his son's chair. Nolan looked at him with a mixture of hope and fear. "Daddy, do you think I can try?" Henry held his son's face in his hands, looking deep into his eyes. "Son, I spent months thinking it wasn't worth it, but looking at you now, seeing this light in your eyes, I think it's worth trying. But what if I can't? Then we'll have tried together, and that will already be a victory." Nolan threw himself into his father's arms and cried, but these were different tears now. They were tears of release, from someone who had carried a weight alone and could finally share it. Henry held him tight, feeling his heart open in a way it hadn't in a long time. Ivy, seeing them hugging, clapped her hands. "We start on Monday." Eleanor, who had also come down to the yard, smiled through her own tears. "You two are special," she said quietly. The sun continued to shine through the trees' leaves, painting all of them in golden light. And in that moment, there in the yard, the miracle didn't happen in Nolan's body. It happened in Henry's heart, because for the first time since the tragedy, he wasn't just surviving, he was believing. And sometimes, believing is where all miracles begin. Henry didn't sleep that night. He lay awake thinking about Ivy's words, the hope he had seen in Nolan's eyes, the possibility that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. When the sun rose on Saturday, he was already sitting in the kitchen with the phone in his hand, looking for Nolan's doctor's contact. He called as soon as business hours opened. "Dr. Martinez, this is Henry Caldwell. I need to make an urgent appointment for Nolan." On the other end of the line, the doctor hesitated. "Did something happen? Is he all right?" "He's, different. Better. And I need to know if there's any real chance of recovery." There was a pause. "Mr. Caldwell, we've discussed this. The chances are minimal, and I know what you said, but I need to hear it again." With him present, with hope present, the doctor sighed, but there was understanding in his voice. "Monday, 10 a.m. I'll fit you in." "Thank you." Henry hung up and stared at the phone. His hands were shaking slightly. He was scared, but it was a different kind of fear. It was the fear of someone about to try something important. On Sunday, when Ivy and Elena weren't there, Nolan was quieter, but it wasn't the empty silence from before. It was a thoughtful silence. "Dad?" he called from the living room. Henry dropped what he was doing and went to him. "Yes, champ? Do you think Ivy is right? That I can really try?" Henry sat on the sofa next to his son's chair. "I think Ivy sees things that we forgot how to see, and I think it's worth trying. But it's going to hurt. It probably will. What if I can't do it?" Henry held his son's hand. "Then at least you'll know you tried, and I'll be right here, by your side, the whole time." Nolan looked at his father with those blue eyes, so much like his mother's. "You promise?" "I promise." Nolan nodded slowly, processing. "Okay, then I'll try." On Monday morning, Henry dressed Nolan carefully and took him to the car. He was about to close the door when he heard a familiar voice. "Wait!" Ivy was running down the sidewalk with Eleanor right behind her, trying to catch up. "We're coming with you," Ivy announced, out of breath. Henry looked at Elena, surprised. "Ivy insisted," Elena explained, a little sheepish. "She said it was important to be there." "I'm his coach," Ivy declared with total seriousness. "Coaches go to all the appointments." Henry couldn't help but smile. "Then let's all go." Dr. Martinez's office was modern and cold, filled with medical equipment and anatomical posters. Ivy looked at everything with curiosity, holding Nolan's hand while they waited. When they were called, they all went into the room together. Dr. Martinez was a middle-aged man with grey hair and glasses on his nose. He greeted Henry, looked at Elena with polite curiosity, and then his eyes landed on Ivy. "And who are you, young lady?" "Ivy. I'm Nolan's coach." The doctor blinked, surprised, but then he smiled. "I see. Well, it's always good to have support." He examined Nolan carefully, testing reflexes, sensitivity, mobility. He asked technical questions that Henry tried to follow. Ivy watched everything with absolute attention, as if memorizing every move. Finally, Dr. Martinez sat down and looked at Henry. "Mr. Caldwell, you said on the phone that Nolan is different. Can you explain?" Henry looked at his son, who was looking back with expectation. "He's more present, more alive. And he wants to try. He wants to try to walk again." The doctor nodded slowly. "I understand. And you want to know if that's possible?" "Yes, Doctor." Martinez steepled his fingers, choosing his words carefully. "Nolan's injury is serious, but it's not complete. That means there is some neural connection preserved. With intensive physical therapy, with a lot of effort and dedication, there is a possibility of partial or even full recovery." Henry felt his heart speed up. A real possibility. Real, yes. But it won't be easy. The doctor looked directly at Nolan. "It will hurt. It will be frustrating. There will be days when you'll want to give up. And even with all the effort, there are no guarantees." Ivy stepped forward, placing her hands on the arms of Nolan's chair. "But there's a chance, right? There's a chance he can walk again." The doctor looked at the determined little girl and nodded. "Yes, there's a chance. Then we'll try," Ivy declared, turning to Nolan. "Do you want to try?" Nolan looked at Ivy, then at his father, and nodded. "I want to." Henry felt his eyes sting. He stood up, went to his son's chair, and knelt in front of him. "Nolan, look at me." The boy looked. "This time, I'm not leaving your side. I promise. I'll be here for every exercise, every attempt, every fall, and every victory. We're going to do this together." Nolan threw himself into his father's arms, and Henry held him tight, feeling tears run down his face. Elena, watching from a nearby chair, put her hand to her chest. The rigid, distant man she had met was transforming. He was becoming human again. Dr. Martinez watched the scene in silence, and then said softly, "I'll prepare a physical therapy program, 3 times a week here at the office, and daily exercises at home. It will require dedication from everyone." "We can handle it," Ivy guaranteed, and there was so much certainty in her voice that even the doctor smiled. In the following days, the house's routine changed completely. Henry cleared out part of the living room and turned the space into a small rehabilitation center. He bought floor mats, support bars, exercise balls, but the most important equipment cost nothing. It was his and Ivy's constant presence. Every morning after breakfast, the exercises began. At first, they were simple things. Ivy and Henry helped Nolan sit up straight without support. He would tremble, sweat, and sometimes simply fall to the side. But Ivy was always there. "Try again. You almost got it." "I can't," Nolan would say, frustrated. "Yes, you can. Just one more time. For me." And Nolan would try again. Henry watched closely, holding his son when needed, encouraging him with words he didn't know he had inside him. "That's it, champ. You're doing great. Just a little more." Elena worked around the house, but she always stopped to watch. She saw a transformed Henry, participating, involved. The man who used to hide at work now spent hours on the floor with his son, sweating with him, laughing with him, hurting with him. One afternoon, after an hour of exercises, Nolan managed to lift his torso on his own and hold it for 5 seconds. Ivy screamed so loud that Eleanor came running from the kitchen. "He did it!" He sat up all by himself. Henry grabbed his son in his arms and spun him in the air, laughing and crying at the same time. "You did it, Nolan. You did it!" Nolan was laughing too, surprised at himself. "I did it! You're coming back, Nolan!" Ivy jumped around them. "I told you you could do it. It was a small victory for the world, but a huge one for them." That day, during dinner, Nolan ate more than he had in weeks. He talked, told them about the exercises, asked when they would try again. At night, when Henry went to put him to bed, Nolan grabbed his father's arm. "Dad? Yes? Can you read me a story?" Henry froze. Nolan hadn't asked for that since before the accident, since his mother was still alive. "Of course, champ. Which story do you want?" "The one about the knight and the dragon." Henry took the book from the shelf, an old book that had been Nolan's favorite when he was smaller. He sat on the edge of the bed and began to read. His voice was shaky at first, thick with emotion. But as he read, he calmed down, getting into the story, doing different voices for the characters. Nolan listened with shining eyes, holding the blue horse to his chest. When the story ended, he was almost asleep. "Dad," he murmured. "I love you." Henry had to bite his lip to keep from sobbing. He kissed his son's forehead. "I love you too, champ." More than anything in this world, Nolan smiled and closed his eyes. Henry left the room slowly and closed the door. In the hallway, he leaned against the wall and let the tears fall freely. Elena was in the kitchen, putting away the last of the dishes. When she saw Henry, she stopped. "Is everything okay?" Henry shook his head, but he was smiling through his tears. He asked for a story. For the first time since the accident, he asked for a story. Elena walked over and touched his arm gently. "You're being a wonderful father. I should have been this way from the beginning, but you are now. And that's what matters." Henry looked at her, at this woman who had come into his life bringing light without asking for anything in return. "Thank you for everything, for being here, for letting Ivy be a part of this. Ivy adores Nolan, and Eleanor hesitated. "I like being here, seeing you two find each other again." They stood there in the comfortable silence of the kitchen as the house breathed around them. Upstairs, Nolan slept with a smile on his face. And for the first time in a long time, everyone was where they needed to be. In the following days, the progress continued, slow, painful, but real. Nolan managed to support himself for longer. Then, he started working his leg muscles, trying to make small movements. Ivy was there for every attempt, celebrating every millimeter of progress as if it were a completed marathon. "You moved your foot. I saw it. You moved it. It was just a little. It doesn't matter. You moved it. That means it works." Henry wrote everything down in a notebook. Every exercise, every small victory, every obstacle. He had turned his son's recovery into a mission, and he was dedicated body and soul. Elena watched it all with growing admiration. The man she had met was different from this one. That man was closed off, distant, lost. This one was present, involved, alive. One evening after Ivy and Eleanor had left, Henry was putting away the exercise equipment when Nolan called him from his chair. "Dad, I'm scared." Henry stopped and went to him. "Scared of what, a champ? Of not making it, of disappointing you, of disappointing Ivy." Henry knelt in front of his son. "Nolan, you listen to me. No matter what happens, no matter if you walk or not, you will never disappoint me. You are my son and I love you exactly as you are. But I want to do it. I know. And we're going to try our best. But even if it doesn't work out, you've already given me the biggest victory possible." "Which one?" "You came back. You came back to wanting to live. And that's all I ever needed." Nolan hugged his father, and Henry held him tight. And in that embrace, they were both healing, not just Nolan's body, but both of their souls. Because sometimes, the miracle isn't in walking again. It's in living again, and they were finally living again. 6 months had passed since that first conversation in the yard. 6 months of daily exercises, of sweat, of tears, of small victories and big frustrations. 6 months of Ivy shouting encouragement, of Henry catching his son when he fell, of Elena preparing nutritious meals and watching this family be reborn. And now, finally, it was time. "Today we're going to the park," Henry announced at breakfast. Nolan looked up, surprised. "To the park?" "Yes, where it all began." Ivy clapped her hands, excited. "That's where you're going to show the world." Nolan looked at his own legs. He could already stand with support. He had already taken a few shaky steps around the house, always holding onto furniture or people. But he still wasn't sure if he could do it in public. "What if I can't?" "You can," Ivy said with that unshakable confidence that had never wavered. I know you can. Henry knelt beside his son's chair. Nolan, it doesn't matter what happens today. The fact that you're trying is already a victory. But I believe in you. The boy took a deep breath and nodded. Okay, let's go. The park was exactly as it had been on that first Sunday, months ago. Kids running, parents chatting, the sun shining through the trees. But everything felt different now. Henry pushed Nolan's wheelchair under the same oak tree where Ivy had first sat. Elena walked beside them, carrying a backpack with water and towels. Some people looked at them with curiosity, but most were too busy with their own lives to notice. Ivy held Nolan's hand, bouncing with excitement. This is it. This is where it all started. Nolan looked around, the memories flooding back. He remembered how he felt that day, empty, lost, hopeless. And now he was here, about to try something that had seemed impossible months ago. Henry locked the chair and stood in front of his son. Are you ready? Nolan looked at his father, then at Ivy, then at Elena. All three were there, waiting, believing. I'm ready. Henry helped his son stand up. Nolan held tightly to his father's arms, his legs shaking with the effort of supporting his own weight. Breathe, Henry instructed. You've got this. Nolan closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and then opened them again. I'm going to try. Ivy positioned herself on his other side, offering her arm for support. I'm here. We'll do it together. Henry took a step back, letting go slowly. Nolan wobbled, but Ivy held him steady. Go, Nolan. One step at a time. Nolan looked ahead, at the grassy path in front of him. It looked like an impossible distance, but he had to try. He lifted his right foot. It trembled. He almost gave up. But then he put his foot down on the ground in front. One step. Yes. Ivy shouted. You did it. One more. He tried his left foot. It was harder. The leg didn't want to obey, but he forced it, focused all his energy, and managed to move it. 2 steps. Henry was paralyzed, his hands covering his mouth, his eyes already filling with tears. Elena beside him watched with her heart pounding. Nolan took the 3rd step, then the 4th. And then he stumbled. He fell to his knees on the grass, letting out a cry of frustration. Nolan! Ivy knelt beside him. It's okay. You just have to get up. I can't anymore, he cried. It hurts too much. But you're doing it. You already walked. Now you just have to keep going. Henry took a step forward, about to help, but Elena grabbed his arm. Let him try, she whispered. Ivy looked directly into Nolan's eyes. Remember the promise? We promised we would try. So get up. Just a little more. For me. Nolan looked at his friend, at this girl who had never doubted him, not for 1 second. And something inside him ignited again. He put his hands on the ground and, with enormous effort, managed to push himself up. His legs were shaking so hard they looked like they would give out at any moment. But he was standing. I'm standing, he said, surprised at himself. You are standing, Ivy shouted. Now walk a little more. Nolan took a deep breath. He took another step, then another, and another. His steps were clumsy, shaky, but they were real steps. Henry couldn't hold it in anymore. He covered his face with his hands and began to sob openly. Sobs racked his chest, all the tension and fear of months releasing at once. Eleanor moved closer and hugged him, letting him cry on her shoulder. She did the impossible, Henry said between sobs. Ivy did the impossible. Elena looked at her daughter, at that girl with clear eyes and a huge heart, and smiled through her own tears. No, she answered softly. She just believed. Nolan kept walking, leaning on Ivy, until he reached the bench where it had all begun. When he got there, he turned and looked at his father. Dad, I did it. Henry ran to his son and hugged him so hard he almost knocked him over. They both fell to their knees on the grass, hugging, crying, and laughing at the same time. You did it, champ. You did it. I walked, Dad. I really walked. Ivy jumped around them, clapping. I told you you could do it. Eleanor approached, her eyes red, and hugged her daughter. You are special, my girl, so special. Some people in the park had stopped to watch. When they realized what was happening, they began to applaud. An old man walking his dog came over, his eyes watery. Congratulations, son. You're a champion. Nolan looked around at all those people clapping and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Pride. Pride in himself. Henry held his son's face in both hands. I am so proud of you. So proud. I couldn't have done it without you. Without all of you. Nolan looked at Ivy and Elena. We're a team, Ivy declared, holding out her hand. Henry placed his hand on top of Ivy's. Elena placed hers. And Nolan, last, placed his hand on top of them all. A team, he repeated. They stayed there for a long moment, under the oak tree where it all began. The place where a boy had lost hope was now the place where he had found himself again. The place where a father had seen his son smile for the first time in months was now the place where he had seen him walk. The place where it all began was now the place where everything had been transformed. Henry looked at Elena, at this woman who had come into his life bringing light, and saw in her something that scared him and filled him with hope at the same time. She looked back, and something passed between them, something silent, but powerful. Ivy and Nolan ran back to the grass, Nolan stumbling but determined, Ivy holding his hand. Let's go again, she shouted. Let's go, Nolan agreed, laughing. And there, in that park full of life, 4 people who had met by chance discovered that sometimes miracles don't fall from the sky. Sometimes they grow slowly, one step at a time, sustained by the faith of a child and the love of people who refuse to give up. And sometimes the biggest miracle of all isn't walking again. It's believing again. It was a Wednesday afternoon, and the children were in the yard practicing Nolan's steps. He could already walk short distances by himself, though he still needed frequent breaks. Henry was in the kitchen, drinking coffee, when Elena came in to get a glass of water. She seemed more relaxed lately, less tense, as if she had finally found a place where she could breathe. They're happy, she commented, looking out the window. They are, Henry smiled. I never imagined I'd see Nolan like this again. Eleanor leaned against the counter, holding the glass of water in her hands. You know, I never imagined we'd be here either. What do you mean? She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. A few months ago, I was completely lost. No job, no prospects, feeling like a failure as a mother. And then we found you and Nolan in that park. Henry watched her. There was something in her voice that suggested she was about to share something important. You never told me much about what happened. About how you lost your job. Elena gave a small, sad smile. It's not a very interesting story. I'd like to hear it, if you want to share. She took a deep breath, looking at the glass in her hands. Before, I worked at a large company, Caldwell Industries. Henry felt his stomach clench, his last name, his company. Elena continued, not noticing his reaction. I was an administrative assistant, nothing important, but it paid the bills. I liked the work, I was good at it. She paused, until Ivy got sick. What happened to her? Pneumonia. It was serious. She was hospitalized for a week, and after that, she needed constant care for 2 more weeks. I notified the company, sent the doctor's notes. I did everything right. Henry already knew the end of this story. He had heard versions of it hundreds of times over the years, always from the other side of the desk. When I returned, they called me into HR. They said they couldn't rely on me anymore, that I had missed too much time, that the company needed people who were committed. Elena's voice was calm, but there was an old pain there. I tried to explain. I showed the documents, the notes, but it didn't matter. I was fired that same week. I'm so sorry, Henry said, and his voice came out rougher than he intended. After that, it was hard to find another job. I didn't have good references, and every time I got to an interview, when they asked why I left my last job, I saw their expression change. She shook her head. So I started making sweets at home, sold them to neighbors at small markets. It was enough to survive, but barely enough to cover rent. Henry felt something heavy settle in his chest. He vaguely remembered approving a round of layoffs around that time. Necessary cuts, they had said. People who weren't productive enough. "Do you remember when this was?" he asked, already knowing he didn't want to hear the answer. 2 years ago, April, 2 years ago. Henry closed his eyes. He remembered that month. It had been right after the accident. He was buried in work, using the office as a refuge, signing papers without reading them, approving decisions without question. "Eleanor." He opened his eyes and looked at her directly. "Caldwell Industries is my company." She blinked. Confused. "What?" "I'm the owner, and I probably..." He swallowed hard. "I probably signed off on your termination." The silence that followed was dense. Elena stood frozen, processing this information. Her face went through several expressions: surprise, confusion, and then something like understanding. You didn't know it was me?" "No. I didn't know." Henry ran a hand through his hair, the guilt crushing him. "Back then, I was running from my own life. I signed stacks of papers without looking. I let HR make decisions I should have questioned. I was lost." Elena remained silent, looking at him. "I fired people like you," he continued, his voice thick with regret. "People who were just trying to take care of their families, people who deserved a second chance, some understanding, and I didn't give it, because it was easier to cut costs than to be human, Henry. You had every right to be angry when you found out who I was, every right to refuse to work here." Elena put the glass in the sink and turned to face him completely. "I didn't know who you were until just now. And you know what? Even if I had, it wouldn't have changed anything. How can you say that? Because the man who fired me isn't the man standing in front of me right now." She stepped closer, her voice soft but firm. "That man was lost, broken, running from pain. This man here is present. He's trying. He's being a real father to his son. But what I did to you, what you did was wrong. I'm not going to lie about that." Elena crossed her arms. "But you can't change the past. Neither of us can. The only thing we can do is try to be better now." Henry shook his head, the guilt still weighing on him. "I wish I could fix it. I wish I could go back and do it differently." "You can't go back, but you can do differently now." She touched his arm lightly. "And you are. You gave me a job when I needed one. You treated me with respect. You let Ivy be a part of Nolan's life. You are being better. It's not enough. Maybe not. But it's what we have." Henry looked at her, at this woman who had every reason to hate him, but who chose to see the best in him. "How can you be so understanding?" "Because I've made mistakes too. And I'd also like to be judged by the person I am today, not the person I was at my worst moment." She smiled sadly. "We all deserve that chance." From the yard came a shout of joy. Nolan had just walked to the end of the lawn without falling. "Look, Dad, look what I did." Henry waved through the window, forcing a smile. Eleanor watched the children for a moment, then looked back at Henry. "Do you want to know what I really think?" "What?" "I think maybe life put us in that park for a reason. Not just to save Nolan, but to save all of us. You, me, the kids. We all needed this second chance." Henry felt something release in his chest. It wasn't complete absolution. The guilt was still there and probably always would be, but there was something else now, the possibility of redemption. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for giving me that chance, even without knowing you were giving it. You don't have to thank me. Just keep being this man, the father Nolan needs, the person you're becoming." Henry nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. They stood there for another moment, side by side, watching the children play. There was something new between them now. Not just gratitude or respect, but a deeper understanding. Both had been broken by the past. Both had made mistakes or suffered injustices. But here in this house, They were building something new, not erasing the past, but learning to live in spite of it. "Elena," Henry said softly. "Yes? From now on, you're not just an employee here. You're family." Elena felt her eyes sting, but she smiled. "Thank you, Henry. That means a lot." And in that simple moment, in the kitchen lit by the afternoon sun, two people wounded by the past found peace in the present. Not because the past had been erased, but because they chose not to let it define the future. It was during breakfast on a normal Tuesday that Nolan made the announcement, "Dad, I want to go back to school." Henry almost dropped his coffee cup. Elena, who was serving pancakes, froze mid-motion. Ivy looked up from her plate, curious. "You want to go back to school?" Henry repeated, making sure he'd heard right. Nolan nodded, but there was hesitation in his eyes. "I do. But..." He looked at Ivy. "Only if Ivy goes with me." Ivy slammed her hands on the table, excited. "I'll go. Yes, I'll go." Elena moved closer, touching her daughter's shoulder gently. "Honey, Nolan's school is a private school. It's different from yours." "But he said he'll only go if I go with him," Ivy protested, turning to Nolan. "We promised to stick together, remember?" Nolan held her hand across the table. "I'm scared to go alone, but with you, I can do it." Henry watched the two of them, his chest tight with emotion. Then he looked at Elena, who seemed torn between joy for her daughter and practical concern. "I'll handle this," he said calmly. "Henry, you don't have to..." Elena began. "I want to..." He looked at the children. "They need each other, and if Ivy is willing to keep being Nolan's strength, then I'm going to make it happen." Ivy jumped out of her chair and hugged Henry. "Thank you, Mr. Henry." He laughed, awkward with the sudden affection, but hugged her back. "You're welcome, little one." In the following weeks, Henry moved mountains. He called the school, spoke with the principal, and explained the situation. He offered a full scholarship for Ivy, covering the costs of uniforms and supplies. He made sure everything was done with dignity, without sounding like charity. When Elena found out how much he was doing, she tried to protest. "Henry, this is too much. I can't accept it." They were alone in the kitchen, after the children had gone to bed. "Elena, it's not charity. It's justice." He moved closer, looking directly at her. "Ivy saved my son. She gave him something no money in the world could buy. Let me do this for her, for both of you." Elena felt her eyes sting. "You don't owe me anything." "It's not about owing, it's about wanting." Henry touched her arm gently. "You two have become part of our lives, and I want Ivy to have every opportunity she deserves." Elena looked at this man who had come into her life so unexpectedly, the man who, without knowing, had signed her termination papers years ago, but who was now trying to be better. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You don't have to thank me." But there was something new in the air between them, something that went beyond gratitude or obligation. The first day of school arrived on a sunny September morning. Nolan was nervous, adjusting his new uniform several times. Henry helped fix his tie, his hands shaking slightly. "You're going to be fine, champ. What if the kids look at me funny? What if they think I'm different? You are different." Henry knelt in front of his son. "You're brave, determined, and stronger than most people they'll ever meet." Nolan smiled, but still looked unsure. The doorbell rang, and Ivy ran in, wearing the same uniform as Nolan. She spun around, making her skirt twirl. "Look, we're matching." Nolan laughed, and the tension in his shoulders visibly eased. "We are?" Eleanor came in right behind her daughter, dressed simply but carefully. Her eyes shined seeing Ivy so excited. "You both look beautiful," she said, her voice thick. Henry grabbed the kids and backpacks and guided them to the car. Elena came along, sitting in the back seat with the children. During the drive, Ivy talked non-stop about everything she wanted to do at the new school. Nolan listened, smiling, letting her excitement infect him. When they arrived in front of the school, Henry parked and everyone got out. It was a large, beautiful building, with well-kept lawns and uniformed children walking through the gates. Nolan looked at it all and swallowed hard. "You can do this," Henry said, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. "We can do this," Ivy corrected, taking Nolan's hand. They started walking toward the gate. Nolan limped slightly, his steps still not completely steady, but he was walking. On his own. Ivy held his hand tightly, matching her steps to his. "Now we're going to learn together," she said, smiling. "Together," Nolan repeated, squeezing her hand. Henry and Eleanor stayed behind, watching. The children walked hand in hand to the entrance, where a teacher was waiting for them with a welcoming smile. Ivy waved back, and Nolan did the same before they went inside. Elena brought her hand to her chest, tears streaming freely down her face. "My baby girl is growing up." Henry, beside her, also had moist eyes. "They're growing up, both of them." Elena turned to him, and for the first time, Henry saw not just gratitude or respect in her, but something deeper. "Thank you," she said, "for all of this." "You don't have to thank me. It was the right thing to do." They walked back to the car in a comfortable silence, but something had shifted. There was a new intimacy between them, built over months of living together, of shared challenges, of victories celebrated together. In the following days, a new routine was established. Henry drove the kids to school every morning. Elena usually came along and they would talk during the drive. Simple conversations about daily life, about the kids, about future plans. But there were moments when their gazes lingered a little longer. Moments when an accidental brush of hands made them both pause and look at each other. One night, after Nolan had gone to sleep and Ivy and Elena were about to leave, Henry offered tea. "Stay a little longer?" he asked. "I wanted to talk," Elena hesitated, but then nodded. "Can Ivy watch some TV in the living room?" "Of course." They sat in the kitchen, steaming mugs of tea between their hands. The house was quiet, just the soft sound of the TV in the background. "How are you feeling about all this?" Henry asked. "With Ivy at the new school, with all the changes?" Elena smiled. "Honestly, it still feels like a dream. A few months ago, I was struggling to pay rent, selling sweets on the street. And now my daughter is at one of the best schools in the city. She deserves to be there. I know, but it's still surreal." Henry took a sip of tea, choosing his words carefully. "Elena, I need to tell you something." She looked at him, attentive. "You and your daughter saved my son." His voice was thick with emotion. "But more than that, you taught me how to feel again." Elena stayed quiet, just listening. "After the accident, I shut down. I built walls so high I couldn't even climb them myself. I worked non-stop just so I wouldn't have to feel anything." He looked at his own hands. "I was alive, but I wasn't living, and Nolan wasn't either, Henry. But then you showed up, and Ivy, with that impossible smile, decided that Nolan deserved a chance, and you, with your quiet strength, showed me there was still kindness in the world." He lifted his eyes and met hers. "You taught me how to live again." Helena felt tears rise, but she smiled through them. "Maybe we all learned how to walk again." Henry blinked, surprised by the simple depth of those words. Maybe so. They sat there, looking at each other, and something passed between them. Something that didn't need words. Elena stood up slowly, placing her mug in the sink. "I should go. It's getting late." "Wait." Henry stood up, "You too." "Elena, He stopped, unsure how to continue. She turned, waiting. "I'd like to... I don't know. Maybe have dinner together sometime. Just the two of us." Elena smiled, a soft, meaningful smile. "I'd like that too." The relief on Henry's face was visible. "Really? Really?" They stood there for another moment, too close and too far at the same time. Then Ivy appeared at the kitchen door, rubbing her eyes. "Mom, can we go now?" Yes, honey, let's go. Elena grabbed her purse and called Ivy. At the door, she turned one last time. Henry? Yes. Thank you. For everything. And for being honest with me. Thank you. For letting me be a part of your lives. When the door closed, Henry stood there for a long moment. Something was changing. Something big and scary and wonderful all at the same time. Upstairs, he heard Nolan shift in bed. He went up to check. Dad? Nolan called sleepily. I'm here, champ. Are you happy? The question caught Henry by surprise. I am. Why? Because you smile more now, and I like it when you smile. Henry sat on the edge of the bed and stroked his son's hair. I like it too, and it's thanks to you and Ivy and Eleanor. They're special, aren't they? They're very special. Nolan smiled sleepily. I think they should stay with us forever. Henry felt his heart squeeze. Maybe one day. I hope so. Nolan turned over and went back to sleep, holding the blue horse against his chest. Henry stayed there for a few more minutes, watching his son sleep, thinking about everything that had happened in the last few months. They had started as strangers, two broken families, each in their own way. But along the way, without realizing it, they had begun to fix each other. Together, and maybe, just maybe, they were becoming something new, something that looked a lot like a family. Henry went downstairs, turned off the lights, and went to his room. But before he went to sleep, he sent a text. Friday night, I know a good place. The reply came a few minutes later. As Friday is perfect. And for the first time in years, Henry went to sleep with a smile on his face, not just because his son was better, but because he was too, and the future, which once seemed impossible, was now full of possibilities. The park felt different that spring afternoon. Or maybe it wasn't the park that had changed, but them. Henry parked the car in the same spot as always, but this time there was no wheelchair. Nolan got out on his own, still with a slight limp, but steady. Ivy jumped out, taking his hand immediately. Let's go to the tree, she announced. Let's go. Nolan agreed, smiling. Elena and Henry followed behind, side by side. In the last few months, after that dinner alone, they had grown closer naturally. Conversations that lasted late into the night, glances that said more than words, stolen moments when the children weren't looking, but they still hadn't talked about what it meant, until today. They arrived under the oak tree, the same place where it had all begun almost a year ago. Ivy and Nolan were already running on the grass, laughing, chasing butterflies. Henry looked at Eleanor. Do you remember the first time we came here? Like it was yesterday. She smiled. Ivy showed up out of nowhere and decided Nolan needed a friend. And she was right. Henry took a deep breath. It was time. Elena, there's something I need to do. Come here, please. He called the children. Ivy and Nolan ran back, out of breath, their cheeks pink. Henry held out his hands. He took Nolan's hand with his right and Eleanor's with his left. Eleanor took Ivy's hand, who held Nolan's free hand. They formed a small circle. Almost a year ago, Henry began, his voice thick. I brought Nolan to this park because I didn't know what else to do. Ivy listened, serious, holding tightly to the hands around her. My son had pulled away from life, and so had I. He looked at Nolan. Then you two appeared. He looked at Ivy, a girl who didn't know the word impossible, who looked at my son and saw not what he had lost, but what he could still be. Ivy beamed, proud. And you. He looked at Elena, his eyes welling up, a woman who showed me there was still kindness in the world, who taught me that living isn't just surviving. Elena felt the tears fall. You did so much good for my family. Henry's voice was shaking now. You saved us, and I can't imagine a life without you in it anymore. He looked around the circle. So I wanted to ask, would you like to be a part of it? Of our family, for real? The silence that followed was profound. Then Ivy screamed, jumping, yes! She let go of their hands and hugged Nolan tightly. Nolan, are we brother and sister now? Nolan laughed. hugging his friend back. I think we always were. Elena covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. Henry moved closer, gently touching her arm. Elena? She lifted her face, tears streaming, but smiling. Yes. Of course, yes. Henry pulled her into a hug, holding her as she cried against his chest. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for choosing us. Thank you for letting us be chosen. The children joined the hug, wrapping their small arms around the two adults. They stayed like that for a long moment. 4 people who had met by chance and chosen to become a family. When they separated, everyone had red eyes and enormous smiles. So is it official now? Ivy asked. Are we a real family? We are, Henry confirmed. Forever, forever. Ivy and Nolan ran back to the grass, shouting with joy. Henry and Elena watched, hand in hand. Are you sure about this? Elena asked quietly. Henry looked at her. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Me too. They looked at each other and then, slowly, Henry leaned in and kissed her. A soft kiss, full of promises and new beginnings. When they pulled apart to they heard applause. Ivy and Nolan were standing a few feet away, clapping and laughing. Finally, Ivy shouted. Henry and Elena laughed, embarrassed but happy. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky orange and pink. Other families were starting to leave the park, but they stayed a little longer. They stayed under that tree in the place where it all began. 4 lives that crossed by chance. A boy who had lost the ability to walk and the will to live. A girl who believed in miracles without even knowing she was creating one. A father who had forgotten how to be human. And a mother who had learned to be strong when everything was falling apart. 4 broken people who, upon meeting, discovered that one's pieces could fill another's empty spaces. In the end, they were no longer 4 separate people. They were a family, not by blood or obligation, but by choice, the best and most beautiful choice of all. And as the sun set over the park, as Ivy and Nolan ran between the trees, as Henry and Eleanor walked hand in hand behind them, one thing was clear. Sometimes, happy endings don't fall from the sky. They are built step by step, choice by choice, with faith, courage, and love. And this one was theirs.